Muy buenas noches, buenas tardes y buenos días. Es un placer
Good
darles
afternoon,
a
good
todos la
morning,
bienvenida a
good
nuestra
evening. It
conversatoria
is a great pleasure
sobre
to me
lithium-ion
to
en
welcome
Serbia
you
y
to our
Argentina
discussion on lithium mining
y
in
también
Serbia, Argentina,
la
and
tensión
Chile.
entre la geopolítica actual
In the
y
current
los
field of
problemas
tension
locales
between
y otros
current
retos
geopolitics and
dentro de
local
la
issues.
región.
My name is Julia
Actualmente la
Chef.
Fundación
I am
Heinrich-Böll
the director of the Latin American
Stiftung se
division
realiza
at the
en el marco de
Heinrich-Böll
la Semana
Foundation.
Alternativa de
This
Materias
discussion takes
Primas,
place in the
un grupo
framework
de
of the
trabajo sobre
Alternative Commodities Week
memorandums. Este
organized
grupo de
by the
trabajo es una red
Raw
de
Material
organizaciones
Working
no
Group.
gubernamentales
This working
llamadas,
group is a network
entre
of
ellos
German NGOs
German Watch,
like the
Initiativa
Heinrich-Böll
Welt
Foundation, but
y
also
otras.
Bread for the World, Incota,
Necesitamos
Miserio,
urgentemente
German Watch,
redes
and
para
others.
avanzar en un tema
We
tan
need those
complejo.
networks to make progress in
Nuestra
such a
conversatoria,
complicated topic.
muy importante, está traducida
This
simultáneamente
session will
al
have
español y inglés.
simultaneous translation to
Necesito que
English and
sigan el
Spanish.
globo
If you
abajo
need to select
en
the globe to
pantalla
listen to the
a la derecha.
translation, please do so. You will find it at the bottom
Mientras que
right.
la Unión Europea
Please click on the
es la
globe to
Unión
listen to the
Europea,
translation
el
if you
acuerdo,
desire that.
la alianza
The
estratégica
European Union signed a
de
memorandum
materias
of
primas en
understanding on
Serbia
a strategic raw
demuestra sus
materials partnership
intenciones en
with
contra
Serbia,
de la extracción de
and there are
litio,
many demonstrations
porque las
against
condiciones
lithium mining in
ambientales,
Serbia, also
derechos
because the
humanos,
general conditions in
derecho
terms of the rule of law are not fulfilled.
quien protesta
Whoever
en
protests
contra la
against
extracción de
lithium
litio en
mining in
Serbia
Serbia
vive en peligro.
lives in danger.
Y especialmente por
And
eso
therefore,
le quisiera dar
especially,
una
I would
bienvenida
like to
especial
welcome our
para el señor
panelist from
Alexander
Serbia,
Matkovic de Serbia.
Alexander Matkovic.
En Argentina,
In
el presidente
Argentina,
Javier Milei
President
ha
Javier Milei has
desmantelado
dismantled the
el
Ministry of the
y
Environment
varias políticas
and also
ambientales,
various
entre
protection
ellos la
policies,
necesidad de elaborar
including the need
estudios
for
de
environmental
impacto
impact
ambiental.
studies.
Milei dice que la extracción
Milei
de litio
says that lithium
podría ayudar
extraction
a
could help
Argentina a
Argentina
salir de la
out of the
crisis
economic
ambiental
crisis.
en el país,
The
aunque
country,
especialmente en la
especially
región de
in the
Jujuy, el
Jujuy
gobierno tiene
region, there are
protestas masivas
protests
en contra de las
against
políticas ambientales.
Milei's policies.
Nuestra panelista Pia
Our
Marchigiani
panelist,
de la organización
Pia
FARM
Marchegiani
de
from
Argentina
FARM,
nos contará
from
más.
that Argentine
En
organization, will
Chile,
tell us
estamos
more on
en la
that.
espera de las
In
elecciones
Chile, we are
comunales
waiting
del
for the
26 de
local
octubre
elections
en unas
on
semanas más,
October
que van a ser el
26,
señal
which will
decisivo
be a
para
decisive
el
sign for the
desempeño de
progressive
Boric.
president
Boric
in
está
a
trabajando
few
por un acuerdo
weeks.
de clima,
Gabriel Boric
energía
is
y nivel
working on a
igualitario
climate and
con
energy agreement
Alemania,
on an equal
cuyo
level
valor
with the German
añadido
government,
deberá
where
quedarse
the added
en
value
Chile.
should stay in Chile. That could be
David
the
Jurich
idea.
Toledo, de la organización TERAM de Chile,
Jurich Toledo,
el
Telia
señor
Jurich
Luis
Toledo, from a
Rodríguez,
Chilean
de la investigación
organization,
política
will
verde.
also talk
Síganos
to
a través de
us
nuestras
on
redes
the impact
internacionales.
about the
Son
impact of global
38
lithium.
oficinas en el mundo a nivel global.
He works
Las
for
gráficas a la
an
derecha
organization
de
with
nuestra sala.
many offices all around the
El
world
fact sheet
in the
de
area
Unión
of raw
Política
materials.
se puede
There
llamar
is a fact sheet
un
that could be maybe the correct name for this.
sobre materias
It
primas
is about raw
procedentes de América Latina.
materials
Así se
from
ve
Latin America.
bien.
Can you see that?
Lo van en el chat.
Well, you can see that in the chat.
Ejemplos de nuestro trabajo.
We'll be able to find there examples of our
Malditos,
work.
de la revista Böll-Stiftung,
These
da ejemplos
resources, there
de
is a
riesgos de
magazine in
mediciones
Latin
de riesgos a
America
nivel
about
internacional.
this topic,
También lo van en
and
el chat.
different resources that you can find in the chat.
Fue compilado por mi
It
colega Johanna
was
Zudo,
made by my colleague Johanna Sidov, who will be also here in
asesora
this
de
session.
los debates internacionales
Johanna is also a
sobre el tema
consultant
continuamente.
and an expert on
Es un
international
placer hoy de contar con la
discussions about
presencia
this topic.
de
It is a great
dos
pleasure also to
panelistas
have
que
today
serán
these
introducidos
fantastic
brevemente
panelists
por Johanna,
that we will introduce
junto con el señor
briefly
Alexander
by
Matkovic de Serbia,
Johanna.
Telje
We not
Juric
only
Toledo
have
de Chile,
Alexander Matkovic, but
Pia Marchigiani
also
de Argentina
Telia
y
Juric
a
Toledo from
continuación
Chile and Pia
también a
Marchegiani from
Maggie
Argentina.
Strai, que
And
es delegada
also,
del
last
Parlamento
but not
Europeo
least,
del
member
Grupo
of the
Greens,
European Parliament, Madeleine
está
Zwei
con nosotros.
from the
Muchas gracias
French
por todos ustedes
Greens.
que están aquí.
Thank you very much for being
También
here.
un gran agradecimiento
Finally,
a Teresa
thank you very
Hoffman
much
de
also
Pan para el
to
Mundo,
Teresa
una
Hoffman
organización
from Bread for the
que actualmente
Wall,
está trabajando
which is an organization's working constantly in this area together with us. Johanna and Teresa. Johanna is from the International Policies Division of our foundation, will also work with us. She also supports our concept. Johanna Treffert and Mareike Bödefeld from the Latin American Department of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation will also be present. Thank you very much for your organizational work. This session will be recorded and will be available after this event. Thank you very much. I hope you will enjoy a very interesting event. Teresa, I will pass the floor to you.
Hello, everyone. I will speak in English now. Thanks a lot, Julia, for your welcoming words and your introduction. My name is Teresa Hoffmann. I am a policy advisor on raw materials and fair trade at the German development agency Brot für die Welt. And I'm also very pleased to welcome you to this session tonight. And I also wanted to take this opportunity to let you know that besides the before mentioned German network on raw materials, we also founded about 1.5 years ago a CSO network on European level, the so-called EU Raw Materials Coalition. And Bread for the World and the Heinrich-Böll Foundation are one of the founding members of this coalition, which now already has like more or less 60 members. So within this network, we also follow closely policies on raw materials on EU level, of course, and for example, the implementation of the Critical Raw Materials Act. Today, we want to talk about geopolitics and the interconnection with and impacts on local level. And within the last years, like the biggest global economies like the US, China, and the EU have given their own economies a massive boost through legislations and frameworks such as the US Inflation Reduction Act or the just mentioned EU Critical Raw Materials Act. And with these frameworks or legislations, they provide subsidies and also diplomatic instruments to support their own domestic industries and also to secure their own access to the so-called critical raw materials. And until now, without addressing global inequalities sufficiently. And one of those declared critical minerals is lithium. It's the least dense of solid elements and the lightest out of all metals. And thus it has very specific and valuable characteristics for the industry. And I think that everyone in the room knows that there is a massive global growing demand for lithium, especially to the need for lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles, but also for electronic devices and also for the defense industry. And so who produces or extracts this lithium? In 2023, Australia was the world leader in terms of lithium mine production, followed by Chile, China, then Argentina, Brazil, and Zimbabwe. And the EU imports around like 70% of its lithium demand from Chile. And we also know that, for example, the German car producer BMW is sourcing lithium directly from the US company Livent in Catamarca in Argentina. And China, together with Africa and Latin America, provides around 74% of all battery raw materials. And China supplies around 66% of finished lithium batteries. So all these numbers show that the high dependency of the EU on China and on resource-rich countries in order to meet its current and also, of course, its future demand of this metal. And the answer from an industrial policy perspective was, or one answer was the Critical Raw Materials Act. But until now, there is no binding reduction targets for raw materials consumption foreseen, and enormous social and also ecological impacts of minerals extraction are not addressed sufficiently by this legislation. And with the current approach, the European Union unfortunately didn't choose the pathway of a urgently needed social ecological transformation, and even risks also to deepen neo-colonial production and consumption patterns. And yeah, all those aspects are of great concern for us as civil society, but of course, mostly for people in mining affected areas. And yeah, I hope we can have a fruitful discussion on all these topics today. And with this outline, I will hand over to Joanna and our panelists. Thank you.
Hello, welcome as well from my side. I'm very glad you're here today, and I'm very happy that we have the chance today to discuss from a cross-continental perspective on raw materials policy, specifically on lithium and its impact, and to really look at the global impact, the local impact, and the local tensions that are that come up in this race for resources at the moment. And working on raw materials since more than a decade, I feel that at the moment, really, we have a big peak, and we have the discussions on raw materials are very got high importance on the political agenda. And it's all about getting less dependent from China. And getting the access to the resources with impacts on the ground. And I want to first introduce. We will discuss on what impact it will have on in the different regions and countries, and then also discuss different instruments that could higher standards, or that could create value creation, or that could that prohibit value creation, etc., and standards. I want to first introduce Taylor Yurich Toledo, who will introduce the Chilean context for us. And Taylor is an economist and researcher for the Terram Foundation in the area of economics, natural resources, and nature. And he also presents Terram in the Latin American network of extractive industries, and is elected member of the Civil Society Council of Chilean Copper Commission. And he has done a lot of consultancies on this topic for different international organizations, and is also teaching at universities, and holds a degree in commercial engineering, and has 2 master degrees in applied economics to public policy and international political and economic development. Taylor, you have been working on raw materials since quite a while, and Chile, raw materials extraction is quite present there. And can you tell us what, something about the dynamics about lithium extraction, the policies that are implemented there, and also the reaction from civil society and governments on this? I hand over to you, Taylor.
Gracias, Joanna.
Thank you very much, Johanna. Firstly, I would like to say thank you for your invitation. Thank you, Julia, Ms. Chef, Johanna Sidov, and Teresa Hoffman. Thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you to the Heinrich-Böll Foundation that you have considered us, Terram, to speak about the situation of lithium in Chile. I would like to speak about 3 elements. Firstly, excuse me, just a second. Firstly, Chile is one of the main production countries for minerals in the world. It's one of the most important producers for critical minerals. It's the 2nd largest for copper, of molybdenum, also one of the main producers. Also, silver production. We have also one exploitation project in the environmental area. It is very, very controversial project. And it is indeed, there is the project in the rare earths. It is related to the production of lithium. So it is a strategic place for lithium for the global economy. This situation was strategic, and a large open debate has started in our country. So there is a larger window for the demand for minerals. Will that be a positive thing or a bad thing for our country? But the pressure pressure for our territory is becoming more relevant in the areas of lithium mining, and governance in terms of this exploitation of this mineral is becoming even more important. I will speak about governance later. Thus, there is a very intense discussion for Chile and Latin America as a region about this critical mineral. We are within the process of just transition, or will we have a new green extractivist phase? I would like you to consider this issue. That could be the framework of my next idea. Firstly, I would like to comment on lithium as a structural material that came from the salt mining, salt flats. We had 69 salt flats exploitation. In Atacama, the largest one, where the largest lithium reserves globally are, and the exploitation happened there. It is not a mining field. It is a very frail ecosystem, and it's affected by the global economy. And it is also affected by water reservoirs, allowing the development of local communities and also of objects of observation, which is very relevant for the natural patrimony of Chile. And that exploitation is therefore very controversial. In Atacama, we have those conservational objects, those natural heritage exploitations that are protected by our laws. We have a hydrological system to protect that. In particular, in these salt flats, we have the only two exploitations of this kind in our country. One of them is happening by SQM, which is a company with transnational capital, but also partly with national capital. And other companies are also participating in that. There is one company called the company Albernat from the United States. Both have contracts with the Chilean state. And according to those contracts, there are conditions, terms and conditions for that exploitation. For instance, for the production levels of lithium and for the time of exploitation. In this framework, it is very important to consider that the salt flats from Atacama, before I speak about the challenges in terms of governance, this exploitation is in the Atacama Desert in the north of Chile. And that place is favorable and unfavorable in terms of exploitation. One advantage is there is a model of exploitation according to which the production costs, the exploitation costs are quite low, one of the lowest all around the world. It's a very competitive place, but at the same time, it is also a very fragile ecosystem. It is affected by the climate crisis, with impact on the local waters and also for the local community. That is the context, the background. So we have three challenges in terms of governance. The first one is institutional. These new transitional minerals are critical and are being exploited in Latin America. And we don't have a long history of that exploitation. The exploitation was intensified during the 90s. So we don't have a very, very developed institutional framework.
So especially in Chile, I can summarize the problem in three different lines. One has to do with institutional weakness. In Chile, you might know that we had several corruption cases that had to do with mining and exploitation. So this is all quite marked by corruption. And one of the main bullet points that have to do with all the corruption cases, of course, have to do with transparency that the industry is not showing, and transparency that has to do with these exploitation processes, with the contracts and the concessions that have been granted to these salt flats, and of course all the profits that are generated by the exploitation. And this problem of opacity that have to do with the institutional weakness are linked to the capture that we have observed. So we have evidence that in the lithium industry, we definitely have a capture of state and a political capture. So this capture of state has to do with a certain influence that the industry has on the legislation. When we talk, for example, about the reform, the environmental reform that was reformed in 2010, and everything then has to do with the profits that are generated by the mine. And one of the main influences has been done by the funding that has been done or have been given to the policy-making processes. So this has been done by bribes and intimidation, different governmental institutions, and of course with the involved companies. And we can talk about political capture because they have certain processes of nepotism. So we have a company that is active in Atacama, and then they are active, the SQM company I was talking about before. And to come to an end, definitely the biggest problem in the lithium exploitation has to do with the hydrological situation in the salt flats. And one has to understand that the most studied salt flat, which is the Atacama salt flat, has a certain uncertainty. And the environmental tribunals have declared that situation. So the lithium industry is a water-based industry. Therefore, it means that we are exploiting those lithium spheres in one of the driest, most arid areas in the world. And this, of course, has caused a lot of conflicts with the local communities, because in the salt flats we have our indigenous communities, indigenous people that have not been consulted beforehand. And those are the ones who try to defend the situation in the salt plains. So this is a general overview. Thank you so much, first of all.
Thanks a lot, Taylor. And yeah, I think it's very interesting to hear now, also after many years of experience in the mining sector, there's a lot of challenges coming up. And if we now pass on to Argentina, yeah, Argentina has much less institutional capacities at the moment, or they're taken down, but we will hear more on this and later on. And by Pia. Pia has a PhD in social science from the Latin American Faculty of Social Science in Argentina and a master in global studies. And she is the director of the environmental policy area and deputy director of the Environmental and Natural Resource Foundation FARN, and works in the defense of rights of communities in the extraction of lithium. Welcome, Pia. Can you please tell us about the situation in Argentina at the moment, also how it differs from, Chile, and also what, how you see institutions in this context and civil society in the context of extraction and planned extraction.
Hola, muchas gracias.
Hello, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me well. Do you hear me?
Yes. Alguien estaba poniendo en el chat que no escuchaban.
Somebody was just writing in the chat that you couldn't hear me. I hope I can be well understood and well heard. Thank you so much, first of all, for the invitation to this panel and to be able to join this very important debate that, of course, has to do with geopolitics, as always. And the General Secretary of the United Nations is one of the main
figures in this context. And Telly said it before. He evoked the question if we talk about an energy transition that takes place as well for the global south. I hope you hear me well. Can you just give me some feedback?
Estamos bien.
Bueno, estamos bien, perdón. Entonces,
Okay, sorry for interrupting. Okay, so I'd like to give you just the general context a little bit comparing to what's been said by Taylor. Is this really an energy transition? Are we talking about the energy transition for the global north or the global south? How do we frame this extractivism? And I would like to bring a few elements in order to give a clearer picture of the Argentinian picture in order to talk about the international situation and the competence. So to understand the situation, Argentina under a government, the administration of Javier Milei, that is quite peculiar. So it has the mission to justify how he's taking without really communicating his decisions and the social environmental policy and human rights policy. So I try to explain Argentina, as we said, in comparison to Chile or Peru or Bolivia, not really is a traditional mining country. And in the 90s, we saw a certain change in order to create the possibility in order to extract those minerals that have not been exploited so far. So in the 1990s, when the neoliberalism came about, a package was launched, an incentive package in order to give those companies profits that invest in the country with a fiscal material of about 30 years. And this package now unites of 90 companies. And this, of course, is a tax cost that is a 0.02% of the GDP, and we don't really know if they really fulfill the purposes that were stipulated before and if they really create the jobs that were supposed to be created and so on. And then we have another element that is the ownership of the resources of the provinces. And this may be a difference to Chile because the provinces have the sovereignty about their resources. So they are the ones who control the operations and who grant the concessions. And in Argentina, it is done by the mining institutions and not by the environmental institutions. And then we have a very fragile rule of law. And therefore, we do have a problem with the access to the justice system. And then comparing it to Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina, you have the free possibility to have access to medicine minerals. So whoever goes through the institutional process has the possibility to exploit the minerals. And it's the only one of the lithium triangle countries, if we really talk about this triangle, because it's not really a triangle. So it is the only one where we have free access to metals and minerals. So when Milei came to power, he made three decisions or decided to work in three political lines that have an impact on mining. So he strengthens the incentives to bigger investments in mining. It was already present, but he covered other sectors as well. And then with some of the improvements of the situation of those companies that already benefited from tax incentives, they were already offered a different package. That is the régimen incentivo a las grandes inversiones, o sea, that is the incentive package for big investments that are to be made in the country. But we have two additional elements. One has to do with the drastic reduction of the state involvement. So the state tries to be diminished, and when we have a reduction of the budgets in education, in science and research, in health, in the environment, when it comes to human rights, and the support of indigenous people. So we try to cut all the budgets of the the state institutions. And this then, of course, goes along with bigger protests from the civil society and violence. So we have different elements, but we have a restriction of different elements of freedom, the freedom of association, the freedom of demonstration. And then on the other hand, we have 5 different powers that intervene in the sectors in order to see that those strategic missions, as he calls them, do work. So incentives to the big companies, a reduction of the competencies of the state, human rights, environmental rights, you name it. And then this shows the whole perspective, the whole panorama that mining is given free hands. And then we have the provinces who step in where they have the possibility to authorize the operations in their own area. So we see that in practice, 50 different projects in different provinces, 3 already ongoing, and then we have common projects that have to do with the fact that the social environmental impact is not taken into consideration. We're talking about very fragile ecosystems where it is about the fresh water, our water reservoirs, and the like. So we don't have sufficient studies on how our salt flats behave. We don't have sufficient water reservoirs to provide the fresh water to cover the needs of the communities and the mining companies, and we do not include the rights of the FPA. So the free, prior, and informed consent that is supposed to be taken into consideration with all those indigenous communities that live on their ancestral land. So I don't really have that much time left, but would like to stress that in Jujuy, we have a flexibilization of the constitutional framework and the legal framework that in order to avoid the FPI, the free, prior, and informed consent, that is a mere formality. And 14 years after the extraction of lithium has been introduced, they want to live differently. And then, of course, they say no to lithium. And then in Catamarca, the province of Catamarca, we have 10 projects that are ongoing in the same water reservoir. And then justice tried to block new projects with the help of a legal project. They tried to block new concessions in that same area. And then it has to do that with the fact that the whole panorama talks about more conflicts arising, more social conflicts arising. And then we have a rule of law or the institutions that are weaker than ever. So this is what we're confronted with. I know that has been a lot, but I would like to leave some space for others. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Pia. I think you showed very well how rights are compromised. And I think it's also striking to hear we had just an event 2 weeks ago on Serbia and raw materials. And we also heard that South Korea is also doing deals with Argentina. The EU is having a raw materials partnership with Argentina, although knowing that the rights of local population is compromised and environmental standards are taken down, the interest to invest in Argentina is very high, putting a lot of pressure. Yeah, thanks a lot for this input. And I would now like to go closer to the EU, to Serbia. And we know that also, although being close to the EU, and you wouldn't suspect it directly, also Serbia is facing a lot of repression on people stating the risks of a big lithium mining project where the EU is very interested into. And Alexander, I would like to give you the word. You're author of and research fellow of the Institute of Economics in Belgrade, and you're also a member of the China Law and Development Network of the University of Oxford in the UK, and an external fellow at the Transnational Institute in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And you have, I think, one of your threads telling about the situation of activists and people only mentioning, critiquing and mentioning concerns about this big planned lithium project in Serbia at the moment, how they face repression and how difficult the environment became since the EU and also Germany announced to there's great interest into a big project. I hand over to you, Alexander, and yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the introduction, and of course, thank you all of the attendees for coming. Basically, well, what's interesting is that there's a wave of repression in Serbia that escalated completely after several deals were signed with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz back in July, and basically since then the state has been acting completely unhinged. So I myself was threatened in my capacity as a researcher, which is I think new even for Serbian standards. And that happened after I published a critical text on the 10th of August. Basically, I outlined zero of my personal viewpoints on the mine. So it was basically a text in the daily newspaper where I just like took statistical evidence, showing that the increase in the foreign direct investments in the mining sector of Serbia did not translate into the rise of the living standards in Serbia, but on the contrary, translated into higher output of waste and higher and actually lower resource productivity, which is one of the key indicators for the green transition, meaning that during the green transition, Serbia is going backwards and not forwards. So, my conclusion was that any sort of a new mining project would be detrimental, basically, to the whole concept of development of the Serbian state. And what's interesting is also to look a little bit how the host state will implement these projects. So it's not about only a mine climbing into a country, it's also about the country embedding the mine within its own local laws and economy. And I got about 30 messages with death threats, and basically some of them were written in German. I think the case exploded in the international and local media. And as I said, I was threatened in my capacity as a researcher, meaning I didn't do anything. I didn't blockade. I didn't throw a bomb at someone. I wrote a text. And so I think that's why it all basically exploded in the media, and this repression of violence, repression of citizens has since then basically muted and transformed itself. So there was something called a list of ecological terrorists on which 20 of us were put. For various reasons, and basically the police have started to raid homes, including of one of friends of mine who's a pregnant woman in her 5th month of pregnancy, had her home raided by the anti-terrorist units, and since then there was an increasing rhetoric against the protests and for the mine. I won't go into the details, but I think the economic aspects of this are quite interesting. And I actually got in touch with Rio Tinto, the mining operator, who is a multinational corporation who is going to construct the mine. And I asked them to outline me the methodology of the economic feasibility study that they used. And they basically told me they hired someone called Ergo Group from London. It's a London-based, basically, agency. And it's very interesting. So they calculated the amount of lithium needed globally based on state policies alone. I asked them whether this is true, so they are yet to confirm this. But what's very interesting is how we calculate the amount of lithium we need. It's mostly by looking at the Anti-Inflation Reduction Act in the USA, the Green New Deal. Basically, those are state-led policies, right? And so we're calculating, there's going to be this and much lithium that we need. But at the same time, we're actually having the German car industry like Volkswagen attempting to shut down factories in Germany, and that's actually I think, something we need to consider, because the lithium demand, lithium has this totalizing narrative basically. But if you look at what's going on, I sincerely doubt that, the projections will be that key in the future. I'm not going also into falling prices and whatnot. And so my key point in the text, and something I also want to share here, is that by locking ourselves in, with this really hyper-cyclical industry, the mining industry, the lithium extraction industry, local states will be dependent on the exports of this material, and should the prices fall and should basically something like a car industry crisis occur in Germany, well, then basically, we are all bleep, things are going to be problematic quite high. Not to mention, tax evasions and whatnot, and the ensuing violence, which was also, I think, something that happened in Chile. We can maybe discuss that a little bit on. So I think that both Chile, Portugal, Argentina, and Serbia share perhaps one single thing, and that is the fact that these projects have been pushed through basically almost by force to a lesser, more or less extent, but they, I think, were pushed by force. And I'm not only saying this in the Serbian case, which is probably the most violent, you know. There's also like cases of national energy plans of Portugal, for example, and I think even of Chile, basically being changed so as to accommodate these agreements with the EU. And there were also other states like Rwanda, where basically the European Commission is almost supporting a military regime. And all of this is quite problematic, and I think this will probably wrap it up a little bit. I think there's a tendency, like a global tendency, for laws of the local states to be curbed so that they can embed these like multinational corporations. And the thing is, because lithium and all of these critical raw materials, you know, the list of critical raw materials actually goes back to 2008, and then it was expanded later on more and more. But the thing is, like, these critical raw materials are less, they have like a less energy density than, you know, wood, coal, and whatnot, these like traditional materials, which means that we need more of them, you know? And so that's why the European Commission and Olaf Scholz and basically all of these tendencies exist, you know, to use these critical raw materials to establish strategic partnerships with local states who then actually, you know, need to somehow embed these mines, basically. In Serbia, that happened in 2021, when there was, for example, an attempted law on the change of the law on the expropriation of property. So what that does was basically the state wanted to say that instead of like building a school or a highway or like a hospital, the state can in the future be completely free to expropriate your property without any sort of explanation. That's what caused the protest in Serbia. These changes to these laws, there was of course other like mining laws and whatnot changes, they didn't go through. But the thing is, I see a tendency in all of these states to either circumscribe the current laws or to create new laws which will benefit the mining companies, and to do so at, you know, against the will of the citizens. And I think this is something that we saw, you know, in Portugal, where the Costa government fell, in Serbia, where also Vučić almost fell a couple of years ago, and is now basically counting, as he said today in the news, on the political support of Germany, you know, against the citizens of Serbia, which is, of course, being translated into how the green transition is being perceived in Serbia. It's being perceived as like a neo-colonial thing. And, you know, like persons like Franziska Gartner, basically, who's, you know, sometimes going in the media, don't think it's not a question of who's, if there's going to be a mine, but who's going to mine it, you know, like all this translates into basically a sort of a new colonial perception of the green transition. And I think the Serbian case can actually, you know, shed some lights and like open some questions for the green transition, because it's increasingly being tied to violence. I mean, after like an interview for The Guardian, that after all of the threats escalated, I was asked like what I think, and basically my, you know, like what I personally, you know, like reflected upon after like my own situation was involved in, unfortunately, in this wave of violence. And basically my only thought was, you know, like what's a green transition for if you have like, you know, to basically not kill people, but, you know, to threat people and basically to lock down people to achieve it. I think the green transition, that's something we all forget. It should be about people. It should not be about mining corporations and, you know, about like, you know, this or that car. There are ways in which this can be solved. And I think just like coming from a former socialist country where we had like at least some form of planning, you know, if the EU had some form of planning, perhaps, you know, within the European Union, there are like less populated areas where you need the mine, you know, you can have like more investments into like the public sector. There's like more research being done in like other forms of batteries. And I'm afraid basically that by force pushing all of these projects, you know, and locking certain countries within, you know, this like lithium wave, which might not even be that high, you know, in the coming years, we're basically, you know, making a new division, a future division between, you know, the lithium-locked countries, you know, and underdeveloped countries on the one hand, and core countries which will probably actually have the capacity even, to transition to a new form of batteries, like sodium batteries, hydrogen batteries, or whatnot, or other forms of like transport in the future, whereas these peripheral countries, which will be actually dependent on investments in the lithium sector. And I think that's also the problem, and not to mention, that within the European Union, within these circles, there's basically a discussion about, whether when the lithium is extracted, it should be recycled only within the Union. So, this will create, I think, future divisions, and I will end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Alexander. And I think, now we are very close to the European Union already, and I want to introduce Magdalene Spy. I'm very glad you join us tonight, and you come now, you entered. Can you switch on your camera so we can see you? You entered the European Parliament early this year, so you coming after the Critical Raw Materials Act was actually put in place as one measure to access raw materials for the EU, and you have now become the leader of become the leading member of the Parliamentarian Monitoring Group of the implementation on the Critical Raw Materials Act. So very glad to have you here today. And you're a member of the of Los Ecologistas in France, and you're also a member of the Environmental Committee and part of the delegation to the EU Latin American Parliamentary Assembly. And hi. And I would like to hear from you which strategy is the EU pursuing with regard to the global run on raw materials, and how could the EU become less dependent on lithium as a raw material? How do you?
Thank you. First, of course, I would like to sincerely thank you for the invitation to participate in this online event happening during the Raw Materials Week. It is a pleasure to meet you all and to discuss this very important topic. I am really sorry about what I heard on the tweets that Mr. Matkovic received, of course. I come myself from an industrial region that has a strong past regarding mining. It is also the French first region when it comes to the size of the automotive industry, with about 55,000 jobs at stake. And I want to tell also that for the Greens, the social transition is the main target, and the ecological transition is the way to do that. I would like to say that I completely share your vision on the fact that the mining, smelting, processing, transport, consumption, and end-of-life management of raw materials have devastating impact on communities and ecosystems around the world. I agree that in order to actually realize the objectives of the Green Deal and allow the green transition of the transport sector, the European Union raw materials policies will require a new approach. This new approach is not about repeating the mistake from the past, but learning from them. So to answer your question, the European Union pursuing an extractivist agenda both in Europe and all over the world on critical raw materials, and is actually forgetting the mistake from the past. I was not already elected when the whole discussion around the Critical Raw Materials Act happened, but from what I learned, it was not an easy discussion at European Union level and among the Greens. Indeed, the whole discussion on critical raw materials is not an easy one for our group, as we need critical raw materials to do the transition, but the mining of them has negative consequences on biodiversity, climate, and local communities. We would rather have the mining done in Europe so that environmental and labor standards are higher, but even there, the standard might not be enough. This is why we were really split when we had to vote on the Critical Raw Materials Act, with the French delegation in the Greens voting mostly against it. Indeed, the extractivist objective in Europe was set quite randomly. There was a missed opportunity in the reduced raw materials consumption. And there was the lack of free, prior, and informed consent for indigenous people. I am now working in the Committee on International Trade in the European Parliament, and I can confirm to you that the Commission has made critical raw materials a top priority for this mandate. In the last mandate, the Parliament did not have any leeway on the conclusion of the memorandum of understanding in Serbia, or even one that happened with Rwanda. And in our political guideline, the President of the Commission mentioned clean trade and development partnership without saying what they will be about and how the Parliament will be involved. Hence, it has been a priority for me and for my group to put pressure on the Commission on this. We will soon be having the election of the Commissioner, and I am meeting the one on trade tomorrow and will ask him questions on this partnership. In the meanwhile, we have pushed and succeeded in creating a monitoring group in the Trade Committee on critical raw materials, which will help us to have more scrutiny over the deals that the Commission is doing. So we are really proud of it. Just to let you know, we fought at technical level against the motion of access from the European Union to critical raw material in third country, arguing that the framing was quite neo-colonialistic. It was very hard to find support on that in the room, as even the socialists did not see an issue with the top-down approach the European Union is promoting. Finally, on how we can become less dependent on lithium, I think that a more circular economy is absolutely necessary. As NGOs always say, it means going beyond recycling by rethinking, reducing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and recovering critical raw materials, and staying in a capitalistic system based on the extraction and consumption of resources will always bring us back to money prevailing over the environment, health, and all people. As we can't shift right away to a post-growth system, it will be important to at least set ambitious binding resource reduction targets and put in place stronger regulation on the mining sector and raw materials value chain, both in Europe and abroad. Serbia shows us that it's definitely not because a mine can earn the label made in Europe that it earns the label green and respectful of local communities. Hence, I want to say again my support to all the people fighting in Serbia and who are affected by the mining project. And the same goes for all the local communities of Argentina and Chile. Private interest should never win over people and the planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm glad to have you here and to discuss further now also on, we want to now go a bit more into instruments that are used in this context. We know that the Critical Raw Materials Act uses strategic projects and it uses partnerships to access raw materials, and there's always debate about high standards, about high about value creation that will happen in countries, but the measures that are used in this context are not always convincing. For example, we see in the context, for example, to ensure standards, high environmental and human rights standards, only certifications are used to like if a company applies for its project to become a strategic project within the European Union, it is enough then to show that they will get a certification, or that they will they will get the certification, or are already certified to live up to the environmental and human rights standards. And Taylor, I know that also in Chile, certification schemes are discussed a lot, and also the issue of value creation is discussed a lot. And we also know that value creation always and value addition is always also a term that is used very differently. People use it, mean different things by using it. And I just want to ask you, how do you see, I know that in Chile this is a lot of debate on value creation. How do you see this in this context? And also, how do you see free trade agreements that are used in this context? How do you see this being enabling value creation? And what do you think? What do you think? What do you wish from the EU to do in this context? Maybe also to increase standards. And heading over to you.
It's a question
Gracias,
for me.
Joana, por la pregunta.
No, it's for Taylor. It's for Taylor, and then I'm happy.
Thank you.
¿Sí me están escuchando bien?
And just to remind us, as we want
Okay.
to, please, if you have any questions to the audience, please put them into the chat. We want to introduce them. And there was one question as well to you, Taylor, about if Chile has already strategic projects from the European Union that have been accepted. And we know that the EU will publish its strategic projects, the ones they elected, only in December. So by now, we don't have any information yet on what strategic projects will be accepted by the European Union. But please, keep your answer short, and then we hope that we get more questions from the audience there. Thank you.
Bueno, primero mencionar de que...
Well, first of all, I'd like to mention that those questions that we hear from the chat, I try to answer them directly in the chat. And I will seize the opportunity now to get to your question. I think what's relevant here is how we, from the supplying countries, we establish a narrative. I think there is a different or a huge discussion or the debate on the different narratives on just transition, on the energy transition, green transition, however you want to call it, if it's electromobility or renewable energies. So how do we create this story, this narrative? And this, of course, then has an impact on the processes of local governance. And the experience from Chile, as well as the experience of Latin America, the whole continent, has shown that there basically is an absence of narratives that foster the debate on critical metals or minerals. I think the narrative of critical metals has to do exactly with the demand, with the industrialization, with the global centers of industrialization and their need for metals to create that policy. And so how the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, they support these narratives. How can we make sure that there is a constant supply, a low-risk supply of those critical materials for our centers of industrialization? So the question that we ask ourselves from the Global South, who are suppliers of those raw materials, is what kind of transition we want to see, or are we generating in the framework of the climate crisis that we are observing? So where are we moving towards as a region? And this was an open question that I asked in the beginning of my presentation. Without any doubt, with a practical stance, we observe the definition of different laws, may it be in Chile or on the local level. So whenever we talk about the just transition, then we have very few countries who have a definition for it. And if we have public policies that are in favor of just transition, then we basically don't really have an institutional framework that have to do with the just transition, that supports the just transition. The just transition basically has to do with the phasing out of fossil fuels. But everything that has to do with renewable energies, with the demand for those critical materials is basically absent. So this is quite relevant. So if we want to have a benefit or an advantage of this new demand for green metals or green minerals, if you wish, then we have to see profits and benefits for the local communities. Then we have to design a narrative that stems from those countries who are the suppliers of those raw materials. And there, the government or the state really plays an important role. So if we talk about strategic materials, then we have to talk about the level of extraction. In Chile, this happened in the 1990s, since we are the principal producers of copper in the world and we have the biggest yields of copper, the deposits of copper, then the production increased. And this is the highest level of extraction without any return. So for every single ton that is produced, we receive less benefits as a country. And this acceleration of demand has to be expressed in how we want to define our levels of exploitation, how far we want to go, and what can be produced, what can be exploited, what cannot be exploited, taking into consideration the climate crisis. And then, of course, this has to be the strategic perspective. And then in that sense, so in order to be of benefit, then we need to have a second perspective, which has to do with how we proceed with the exploitation. So how is this value added? And I think in 2015-14, we started with the National Commission, the National Lithium Commission, and then we figured out that we really have to advance in the value-added chain. And instead of exploiting brines and salt flats and to exploit our raw materials with very low added value, to proceed to have more complex, more compound products that we produce, not only lithium carbonate, but further processed products, or even the batteries themselves that are needed for electromobility. And this is a debate that we have ongoing from 2015, 2018, where we really talked about this absence of an added value. And Chile has a trade agreement with the European Union that goes back to 2002, that was updated in 2022, which was ratified in 2023, finally, December of 2023. And there we analyze that the trade impact is very low. So, of course, there are geopolitical interests behind it that have to do with the supply of those raw materials in the lithium corridor. And we have a preferential treatment or preferential exports to the European Union when it comes to lithium. And it weakens the policies that I tried to mention before, the added value, to keep the added value in the country. So it questions or limits the industrial development in this extractive sector inside the country. There even is a specific clause in the update of the trade agreement where it's mentioned that the agreement will limit the industrial policy if this has an effect on the supply of those raw materials to the European Union. So this is something that we observed. So we still have this neo-colonial approach. So nothing really changed. We can see perfectly fine that the Global South is perceived as a supplier of raw materials and not as somebody that you treat on eye level. So, and the only benefit for the region and for Chile of this just transition is that we achieve our productive transition, because otherwise we go into the next cycle of neocolonialism and destructivism to the benefit of the North.
Thanks a lot, Taylor, and Talia. And I think you just mentioned as well, transparency and in this regard as well. And I think that's something which Pia has raised before as well, that there's a lot of agreements made also without civil society being part of it. And I want to ask you, Pia, how can institutions like the EU or banks and civil society have an influence and on standards and to raise standards? And do you think the EU due diligence regulation could increase the standards in Argentina, and under what conditions? Yeah, and what do you wish the EU would do in this context?
Well, gracias. Estuve a punto de tratar
Thank
en
you
inglés.
for this question. I wanted to try to listen to you in English, but then I switched over to English to Spanish in order for it to be clearer. This is quite a difficult question because we talk about the complexity of the moment. We are not taking advantage of the climate crisis in order to transform our productive system. So we are not really taking advantage of the green transition, at least not in the Global South. We see an energetic expansion in the North. So there is a huge opportunity to substantially transform the whole system, the productive system and our social system. So what are those democratic ideas, public debates that are definitely needed in order to live together? And I think what we leave out in this debate is the public sphere and the communal sphere. So we talk about a climate crisis, a triple crisis, and what we have to safeguard is our communal stance. And going back to your question is, I think the majority of those proposals, of the political proposals, may be from the financial institutions, international financial institutions, or institutions from the European Unions, or local entities. I think we leave out this public debate. So those debates are privatized, and the due diligence has a huge potential, but I don't know if we talk about it, the minimization of risks, that we have to talk about the conditions in order for the European Union to not invest in issues that are too complicated when we look at the social and environmental level. But there is they don't really have a different position to work out as an ally, as a partner. So, and then if we look at the case of Indonesia and the trade agreements, it is business as usual. The same conditions are imposed on every single cost. And I think like the debate on the certifications, I think we have to restore the public debate, the public sphere. And in Argentina, I think we have a very extensive jurisprudence of the human rights, the instruments, the international instruments for human rights that give us some signals on how we can do that in order to have those intercultural debates. We know that then 50% of those minerals can be found on ancestral land of the indigenous people. So we have to listen to the voices and the positions of those communities. If the communities are against a forceful extraction, Alexander said so in a different context, then we have to listen to them. And then we have to see if the easy solution, privatizing everything, is the solution, or if we really try to include all those different interests, the multilateral perspective. And those are those problems that we have to tackle instead of strengthening those symmetries. I think we have to try to live within our planetary limits. In the north, in the south, and in the south, we try to come back to the idea of justice, to have communal goods. And in European Union, I think we lose the opportunity to be pioneers in that, to say that we try to think out of the box and to be not part of this international race, and to have a different look at our cooperation, where the value of democracy and the rule of law should be in the center of attention. And I think it's really important to come back to those basic principles, because otherwise we lose sight of what's really important. And so it's not really about how much lithium we need, because the amount of lithium we need will be dictated by our private companies in order to make the most profit possible. It's not really about the just transition in the north or in the south in order to have better relations, trade relations. We have to live within our planetary limits. And it's not an easy question, but I think we have to change the rules of the game. So we simply reproduce those asymmetries that are already existing, and we want to change them once and for all. So therefore, it is very important to think about applying a different logic and the rules of the game that we want to change. But what we see is a reproduction of business as usual and everything that has to do with the agenda of business. And this then implies very long processes. In the south, we have a system where we make more and more debt in the global south. In Argentina, we have 40% of our population that is below the poverty threshold. So there's a very unequal system that we're looking at. And in the European Union, where the need for those minerals is so high, then we have to really look at a possible transition and not do business as usual.
Yeah, I want to give Alexander the word also to respond to this, but also to a question in the from the comments on if all this the protest basically produced by the Kremlin on spreading fake news about it. And yeah, please go on to this question.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very glad for the question regarding the Kremlin, because it has been torn in our eyes. Basically, the article has literally zero relation to reality. And I have copy-pasted my response on Twitter and on the X in the chat box. And basically, a lot of us are either writing statements or videos, denouncing this. And there's also a petition going on. I think it's signed right now, at least by several hundreds of people, to write to the Wall Street Journal with a response. We've also drafted a response, and I don't think this has any, or at least I personally am not aware that I was paid by the Russian Federation. I mean, like on Twitter, I literally wrote, okay, if you want my bank account, I can give it to you. And I invited the Wall Street Journal journalists to actually do the investigation, and to investigate us if they want to. And if they find any sort of relation between me, anyone I know, with the Russian Federation or Kremlin, I will gladly step away from any sort of debate in the future, So to add a little bit on that, why this is so important? Well, basically the idea is that, Russia kind of sees this like as important point if the protests like succeed. But the thing is, Russia has its own interests in lithium. It is basically initiated something called import substitution, so it mines its own lithium as well. It has interest in supporting the Serbian government, to which it has actually been historically tied, and they even have a shared agency, which is called the Agency for the Suppression of Colored Revolution. And this Russian agency has been warning the Serbian government regarding our protests. So there was Russian influence, yes, but it was located and directed against the protests and not for the protests, Serbia and Russia has this special relationship, and basically Russia is one of our 4 pillars of foreign diplomacy, and Vučić actually comes from a party called the Radical Party. his previous party, which was completely pro-Russian. And basically, right now, if all of these propaganda succeed, we will have basically Russia against us, the EU against us, and basically the US opinion against us, and that's actually quite dangerous. And we wrote an open letter to the Wall Street Journal. As I told you, we're still collecting more signatures, so this is a collective thing and not only our own. And basically we told them, people, you are drawing targets on our heads in a situation which is far, anything but safe. Like, are you aware of what you are doing? Basically, and this article doesn't quote any one of us. They did not consult us, they did not ask us for opinions, nor have any investigation been done to prove the actual points apart from their presuming. And the center which was quoted, basically the Global Engagement Center, and also several US officials, they use arguments like it is very likely, it is similar to, it is, they never make a causal connection. And my question is, what sort of journalism is this if you don't prove a point, if you have zero evidence? So that's regarding like the Kremlin basically question. And regarding what has been said by Pia right now, I very completely agree. So this is like a very basically black and white sort of example, where if the German car industry would degrow, so to speak, we would have less violence in the periphery, of course. And I mean, like, when it comes to mining, these mines will actually have very short time span. So after 40 years, they will, be removed and they will wreck the entire economy. So if we become dependent on them afterwards, the EU doesn't have any like alternative to this. And that's why I think that the EU and the core and the peripheral countries should actually engage in more environmental planning and basically admit and actually use this opportunity when the German car crisis is in car industry is in crisis, to actually reconfigure basically some of the basic presumption of the green transition. So we have been doing this green transition thing based on the idea that electric vehicles will be, having this pivotal role within the green transition, while at the same time we have been, going out of a crisis of 2008, which was never resolved. We did austerity measures. I mean, in Serbia, less than 1% of the population can buy an electric vehicle, and it's mostly government officials or people who are working themselves for corporations. That, I mean, I'm quoting the official figure by the representative Volkswagen, who did a greenwashing event basically in my hometown less than 1 month ago. And their hope is for the government and the corporation will buy these vehicles. They also hope that they will get subsidies up to 80% for the electric vehicles and charging stations within Serbia. And they will get that subsidies like within Germany itself. And my question is, how on earth is this profitable? When in Germany you're going to have subsidies. In November, the Critical Raw Materials Board will be meeting to decide whether the other project in Serbia is a strategic project and basically decide whether to give them subsidies. And then the Serbian state will give subsidies. And so we're subsidizing the hell out of all of the chain. And I think that's just bad economics. It makes bad politics. It's going to support authoritarian regimes, as it did already in Rwanda and Serbia, and jeopardize the green transition. I think that's gonna happen, and that's why we should go back to the drawing board, basically do a bit of economic planning, a little bit more, and basically, see if we actually do need that much lithium. If we don't need to open up new mines. And if we want, actually, we can, actually transition, as I said, by increasing public investments rather than subsidizing private corporations, because as it turns out, even according to the heads of the industry, it will not be profitable, let alone help people. That's it.
Majduline, can I come back to you? You have heard a lot of suggestions at the moment. And what are the things, do you want to comment any of these? And what do you take from this now for your work as in the parliament? And what are measures you want to push forward within your time in the parliament? Probably difficult as you're just settling in also into the topic, but I think you can.
I just want to share one or two things. But first, it's the beginning for me. I am new elected. I mean, it's my first mandate, and I have not begin yet at the monitoring group of critical raw materials, so I can go back to you later to explain more what we could do with these activities and when this monitoring group we initiated in the European Parliament. But to react of the question, of course, and what the another panelists share with us. First, I would like to support what was said regarding the narrative. When we are talking about the need to extract, we forget to say what do we need the critical raw material for. Is it for big SUV, for big electric cars, for cell phone being changed every 2 years, or for mass materials absolutely necessary for the just transition? We criticized at the European level the fact that the extraction target was decided in the Critical Raw Materials Act for all the materials at 10%, whilst the needs can't be the same for all of them. There is a complete lack of proper assessment of the real needs and for what purpose. When we talk about the battery only, we forget to mention the need to develop public transport and make it more accessible to everyone. So I totally agree, narratives are crucial because they shape politics. Also, I completely support what was said regarding the free prior and informed consent. Of course, we definitely need to stay within the planetary boundaries. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Coming to the end of our discussion today, I think we all agree that the demand side has a huge impact on what is happening and how it's pushed through, and that this highly impacts the situation of the ground, and that's what we always are saying as well. One way to prevent human rights abuses is really to reduce the demand, but I now want to give you a final word to answer. Maybe in your answer, Pierre, you could also integrate the question which was raised: how do the new rules look like? And do you have idea of new rules? Because I want to ask you, if you would have the political power and you would have the power, what measure would you like to strive to change the situation? What would be, I know that it's much more complex and it won't be solved by one, but just give it a quick thought about what do you think, what would you like to do first to change the situation? Who wants to go first? Alexander, you were already smiling. It seems like you already had an answer.
Yeah, okay, I have a quite specific and a bit funny answer. So I'm actually the answer to this question will be the topic of my postdoc if I get the finances from my degree. I submitted an application for the University of Barcelona. It's a bit awkward for me to advertise my own application, but yes. So, but this is also what I think. So right now I'm preparing to do interviews with Yugoslav environmental planning institutes and look at the case of Yugoslavia as a peripheral socialist country from the past, which initiated a failed green transition, but had an interesting network of planning institutes which were tasked to coordinate corporations, unions, and basically synchronize the economy in that way. And that created its own dynamics and conflicts, not to get into the details, but I think if the EU would have, if I was like in the EU, if I, could do these things, I plan on basically comparing this to current planning practices within environmental ministries. And what I see lacking is basically this coordinated approach that will, that is needs-based, and as has been said by Majduddin. And I think this is very crucial because if we keep on planning for the private industry, and planning is also something that we do, as Mario Draghi mentioned even in his report, the question is not whether the EU does planning. It does, but for the fragmented private corporations. And I think that's a whole elephant in the room, basically, which we need to address. And that's basically, I think, something that will more quickly solve the energy transition at what is being done today. Because it will answer, not by introducing more stuff, but, saying, yes, perhaps we don't need a new mine. Yes, perhaps we don't need new cars. And yes, perhaps we can make do with the funds which we already have, instead of subsidizing the whole EV chain, which can, take years to develop. It's like quite problematic. It's tied to violence right now. We can, invest in more public structure, invest in more environmental planning and research facilities. And, I think there's actually room for this if there was a political will. I'll end there. You're muted.
Sorry. Thanks a lot, Alexander. Who wants to go next on the measure they would take?
I can go if you want. I will be very brief because I have another meeting who will begin soon. Just first, of course, everybody talk about that transparency. It's very important, and you know that this strategic partnership are made without so much deliberation and discussion and debate, etc. And I think we can go more in this way, and of course work with the civil society in the country who are concerned by this issue and by the critical raw materials. But I think it's a key question for the Parliament today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thanks a lot for joining us today. And let's keep in touch on these topics, and looking forward to see how you, the work on the parliamentarian group on monitoring the implementation of the Critical Raw Materials Act. Taylor, do you want to go next? We have 2 minutes to go until the closure of the webinar.
Okay. No, solo dos ideas clave. Primero,
Okay, I just want to say the key issue. We are speaking about just transition. We need to promote the degrowth process. We need to question the consumption, the level of global consumption. We need to consider that we are living in our societies, in our countries, and many people don't have any access to energy, even no access to water and energy. That's why the global society should reconsider the levels of consumption and the access to reach them. And we need a just transition. We need a diplomatic management of minerals at the level of the European Union, and we need to consider fundamental rights, fundamental participation rights, rights to water, and also the right to energy. That should be the diplomatic basis and not promoted geopolitical and commercial interest.
Bueno, ¿qué medida?
Okay, with which measure to change? It's a very difficult question.
It can also be different, and we know we won't change the world with one measure. They're definitely not.
Sabemos.
Just one thing to take with us. We should push forward.
A ver, me parece que hay una cuestión que está en el centro del
I
problema.
think there is one question in the center of the issue. We have inequality in the distribution of materials, of technology. We are becoming a globalized society where those things are too cheap. And also the access to those assets is very important. There is a lot of discussion on ecological debt, degrowth, many concepts, but we need to reconsider how to change, how to generate a different relationship of exchange. That should be in the middle of the discussion. The global South could start thinking about having a real autonomy in this framework of transformation. And I also agree on the very philosophical principles. We need planning, strategic planning in terms of environmental issues. We need to be in harmony with the environment, with ecosystem, and with the people defending those. Alexander spoke about planning at the level of the European Union. This is valid also for the Global South, for Argentina, for Chile. We need to decide what the territory is, and we need to adapt to what ecosystems can give us. This is the only thing we can demand, what is possible within the ecosystems at the pace that is possible. That should be considered in this strategic environmental strategy. And we should avoid hyperconsumption and inequality in the world. Okay, the rest of the issues will be resolved by Johanna.
All discussed about consumption, what impact it has, and yeah, I think the issue is far too complex to be solved in 1.5 hours. Definitely, we need to discuss more, and there's power relations, etc., as you mentioned before, that are very difficult. So we won't solve the issue, but I think we had a really interesting discussion, having a dive into the different contexts and starting to talk about some measures, and we need to continue talking about this. And thanks a lot for being here with us today, and also for joining for the audience to join us in the live stream or in the Zoom here. And have a nice evening or day. In Latin America, you're only the start of the day. Here we all go and have dinner now, I guess, and see you soon.